The rain hammered against the cracked pavement as Marcus Thompson walked down the narrow alley behind the convenience store. His worn leather jacket did little to shield him from the cold, but he had grown accustomed to discomfort. 3 years had passed since he left the military, and civilian life still felt foreign to him. The transition from soldier to ordinary citizen had been harder than any mission he had ever undertaken. Marcus had been visiting his younger sister Sarah, who lived in this rough neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. She worked 2 jobs just to make ends meet, and he tried to help her whenever his own modest income allowed. Tonight he had brought groceries and stayed for dinner, listening to her talk about her dreams of going back to school. Her optimism reminded him of better times, before everything changed. As he made his way to his old pickup truck, Marcus noticed 3 young men huddled near the dumpster. They were speaking in hushed tones, occasionally glancing around nervously. Years of military training had taught him to assess threats quickly, and something about their behavior set off alarm bells in his mind. He slowed his pace, pretending to check his phone while keeping them in his peripheral vision. One of the men pulled out a small package and handed it to another. Money changed hands quickly. Marcus recognized the transaction immediately. He had seen similar exchanges countless times during his deployments overseas. Drug deals looked the same everywhere, whether in the mountains of Afghanistan or the back alleys of American cities. His instinct was to keep walking. He had learned the hard way that getting involved in other people's problems rarely ended well. But as he reached for his truck door, he heard footsteps approaching rapidly behind him. The 3 men had spotted him watching and were now walking purposefully in his direction. "Hey, man," called out the tallest of the group, a thin young man with multiple tattoos covering his arms. "You see something interesting over there?" Marcus turned slowly, keeping his hands visible and his posture non-threatening. "Just heading to my truck," he replied calmly. "Don't want any trouble." The second man, shorter but more muscular, stepped closer. "Funny thing is, we think you might be trouble. You've been watching us for a while now. You a cop or something?" "No," Marcus answered honestly. "Just trying to get home." The third member of the group, who looked barely out of his teens, pulled out his phone. "Maybe we should call this in, Let people know we got someone snooping around." Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before conflict. His military training kicked in automatically, cataloging exits, potential weapons, and tactical advantages. The alley had only 2 ways out: the way he had come, which was now blocked by the 3 men, and the far end, which led to a busy street about 50 yards away. "Look," Marcus said, raising his hand slightly. "I don't know what you think you saw, but I'm just trying to leave. We don't have to make this complicated." The tall man laughed. "Too late for that, brother. See, we got a business to protect, and people who stick their noses where they don't belong, well, they become our business." Before Marcus could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air. Police cars were approaching fast, their red and blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement. The 3 men looked at each other in panic, and the muscular one pointed directly at Marcus. "It's him!" he shouted as the police cars screeched to a halt at the alley entrance. "He's the one you're looking for." 4 officers jumped out of their vehicles, weapons drawn but pointed down. The lead officer, a veteran with graying hair, surveyed the scene quickly. "Nobody move," he commanded. "Hands where I can see them." Marcus immediately raised his hands high, following the order without question. His military background had taught him to respect law enforcement and follow commands during tense situations. The 3 drug dealers, however, seemed to have different plans. "Officer, thank God you're here," the tall man called out, his voice suddenly filled with fake relief. "This guy was trying to rob us. We were just walking through here when he jumped out and demanded our money." The muscular man nodded vigorously. "Yeah, he had something in his jacket. We thought it was a gun. We were so scared," the young one added. "We called you guys as soon as we could. He's been following us for blocks." Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized what was happening. These dealers were trying to pin their crimes on him, using him as a scapegoat to avoid arrest. The officers were approaching cautiously, clearly trying to determine who was telling the truth. "Sir," the lead officer addressed Marcus, "I need you to keep your hands up and turn around slowly." Marcus complied, his mind racing. He knew that resisting or arguing would only make things worse, but he also knew that once he was cuffed and in the back of a police car, it would be much harder to prove his innocence. The word of 3 witnesses against 1 would not look good in any report. "Officer, my name is Marcus Thompson," he said clearly. "I was visiting my sister who lives on Maple Street. 2 blocks from here. I can give you her address and phone number. I was just walking to my truck when these men approached me. The second officer, a younger woman with sharp eyes, was watching the 3 accusers carefully. You 3 stay right where you are. We're going to need statements from everyone, but the dealers were already starting to back away. Actually, officer, the tall man said, we're really late for work. Since you got the guy who tried to rob us, maybe we could just go. We trust you to handle this. The female officer stepped forward. Nobody's going anywhere until we sort this out. I said, don't move. That's when everything went wrong. The muscular dealer suddenly bolted toward the far end of the alley, and his 2 companions immediately followed. The officers had to make a split-second decision: chase the running suspects or secure the one who had remained cooperative. Stop! Police! The lead officer shouted, but the 3 men had already reached the street and disappeared into the crowd. Marcus found himself alone with 4 confused and frustrated police officers, standing in an alley where a drug deal had just taken place. With the actual criminals now long gone, the situation could not have looked worse for him. Well, the lead officer said grimly, pulling out his handcuffs, looks like you're the only one left to tell us what really happened here. As the cold metal clicked around his wrists, Marcus closed his eyes and tried to stay calm. He had survived firefights in foreign countries and life-threatening missions behind enemy lines. Surely he could survive one night in jail while this misunderstanding got sorted out. He had no idea how wrong he was about that. The police station buzzed with activity even at 10 o'clock at night. Marcus sat in the hard plastic chair of the interrogation room, his hands now free but his situation far from improved. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered occasionally, casting harsh shadows across the gray walls. He had been here for 3 hours and his story hadn't changed once during multiple rounds of questioning. Detective Rodriguez, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a coffee-stained tie, sat across from him reviewing a file. His partner, Detective Chen, a younger woman with an intense stare, leaned against the wall taking notes. They had been polite but firm, clearly trying to piece together what had happened in that alley. Let's go through this one more time, Marcus, Detective Rodriguez said, looking up from his papers. You say you were visiting your sister, but when we called the number you gave us, nobody answered. Sarah works nights at the hospital, Marcus explained patiently. She's a nurse's aide. Her shift started at 11, so she probably left right after I did. You can call the hospital to verify. Detective Chen made a note. We will. But here's what's bothering me. 3 separate witnesses say you approached them and demanded money. That's attempted robbery. They say you threatened them. Marcus shook his head. That's not what happened. I saw them making what looked like a drug transaction. They noticed me watching and confronted me. When the police arrived, they panicked and tried to make me the fall guy. If they were dealing drugs, Rodriguez asked, why didn't we find any? We searched that alley thoroughly. They probably ditched everything when they heard the sirens, Marcus replied, or one of them swallowed it. I've seen it happen before. Detective Chen raised an eyebrow. You've seen it happen before? Where exactly would you have seen drug deals and people destroying evidence? Marcus hesitated. This was the part he had been dreading. His military service wasn't exactly classified, but his specific assignments had involved intelligence gathering in some very dangerous places. Explaining his background would raise more questions than it answered. I served in the military for 12 years, he said simply. Special operations. I've seen a lot of things. Special operations, Rodriguez repeated, suddenly more interested. What kind of special operations? The kind where I can't give you a lot of details, Marcus answered honestly. But I can give you my commanding officer's contact information if you need to verify my service record. The 2 detectives exchanged glances. Cases involving veterans could be complicated, especially those with classified backgrounds. They had both seen soldiers struggling with civilian life, sometimes in ways that led them into trouble with the law. Before anyone could speak further, there was a knock on the door. Another officer entered and whispered something to Detective Rodriguez, whose expression changed immediately. Marcus, we need to step outside for a minute, Rodriguez said, standing up. Don't go anywhere. The irony of the comment wasn't lost on Marcus as the detectives left him alone in the locked room. He stared at the one-way mirror, wondering who might be watching from the other side. His sister would be worried sick when she got home and found out what had happened. He hoped the detectives would actually call the hospital to verify his story. 20 minutes passed before the door opened again. This time, only Detective Chen returned, and she looked troubled. "We've got a problem," she said, sitting down across from him. "We just got a call from someone claiming to know you. Says you've been involved in some serious criminal activity." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "What kind of call?" "Anonymous tip. Very specific information about your background, your address, even your truck's license plate number. The caller says you're part of a drug distribution network and that tonight wasn't your first time in that alley." "That's impossible," Marcus said firmly. "I've never been involved in anything like that." "Someone's lying." Detective Chen studied his face carefully. "The caller also knew details about your military service that weren't in any public records. Said you learned how to run illegal operations overseas and brought those skills back home." Marcus's mind raced. Someone was actively trying to frame him, and they had access to information about his military background. That narrowed the list of suspects considerably. Very few people knew the details of his overseas assignments. "Detective, I think I'm being set up," he said. "Someone wants me in jail, and they're using tonight's incident to make it happen. Why would someone want to frame you?" Chen asked. Marcus thought back over the past few months. His life had been quiet, almost boring. He worked part-time at a garage, helped his sister when he could, and mostly kept to himself. He hadn't made any enemies that he knew of. Then he remembered the conversation at the VA hospital 2 weeks ago. He had been waiting for a routine appointment when he overheard two men discussing a scheme to defraud the government, using false veteran benefit claims. When one of them noticed Marcus listening, they had quickly changed the subject and left. Marcus hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now he wondered if it was connected. There might be something. He told Detective Chen about the incident at the VA hospital. "I might have overheard something I wasn't supposed to hear." Chen made notes as he spoke. "Do you remember what these men looked like?" "Any names?" "Not really. It was just a brief conversation. But one of them had a distinctive scar on his neck, like from an old knife wound. Military tattoo on his forearm, too." The detective's phone rang and she answered it quickly. Marcus could only hear one side of the conversation, but Chen's expression grew more serious with each passing moment. "That was Rodriguez," she said after hanging up. "We found drugs in your truck." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "That's impossible. I don't use drugs, and I sure don't sell them." "Bag of cocaine hidden under the spare tire. Our K9 unit found it about 10 minutes ago." The room seemed to spin around Marcus. Someone had planted drugs in his vehicle, probably while he was inside visiting his sister. The setup was more elaborate than he had initially realized. "Detective, you have to believe me. Someone planted that stuff. I've never touched cocaine in my life. I don't even drink alcohol." Chen closed her notepad. "Marcus, I want to believe you. Your story has been consistent and you've been cooperative. But the evidence is starting to stack up against you. 3 witnesses, an anonymous tip with accurate information, and now drugs found in your vehicle." "What about the hospital?" Marcus asked desperately. "Did you call to verify that my sister works there?" "We did. She's there, just like you said. But that doesn't prove you weren't dealing drugs before you visited her." Marcus realized that his military training, which had always been his greatest asset, was now working against him. His ability to stay calm under pressure was making him seem suspicious to the detectives. Most innocent people would be panicking by now. "I need to make a phone call," he said. "To a lawyer?" Chen asked. "To my former commanding officer, Colonel James Mitchell. If someone's using my military background against me, he needs to know about it." Detective Chen considered this for a moment. "We'll see what we can do. But Marcus, I have to tell you, we're going to have to charge you. The evidence is too strong to ignore." As she left the room again, Marcus put his head in his hands. Someone was playing a very sophisticated game, and he was losing badly. But he had survived worse situations than this. He just needed to figure out who was behind it and why. What he didn't know was that his phone call to Colonel Mitchell would change everything, in ways that nobody in that police station could have predicted. The phone call to Colonel Mitchell took place at midnight, with Detective Rodriguez listening on speakerphone. Marcus had been granted one call, and he was using it strategically. If his former commanding officer vouched for him, it might buy him some credibility with the local police. "Thompson?" Colonel Mitchell's voice came through clearly despite the late hour. "Where the hell are you calling from?" "Sir, I'm at the Central City Police Station. I've been arrested on drug charges, and I think someone's trying to frame me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Arrested?" "Marcus, what's going on?" Give me the details. Marcus quickly explained the evening's events, including the suspicious phone call that seemed to know classified details about his service record. Detective Rodriguez took notes, paying close attention to the colonel's responses. Detective Rodriguez, this is Colonel James Mitchell, commanding officer of the 75th Special Operations Regiment. Sergeant Thompson served under me for 8 years, and I can tell you without hesitation that he's one of the most honorable soldiers I've ever commanded. Rodriguez leaned forward. Colonel, we appreciate your testimony, but we've found cocaine in his vehicle and have multiple witnesses claiming he attempted to rob them. Detective, if Marcus Thompson wanted to rob someone, they'd never see him coming, and he certainly wouldn't get caught standing around in an alley afterward. The man's a ghost when he wants to be. This whole situation sounds like amateur hour. Marcus felt a small surge of hope. The colonel's words carried weight, and Rodriguez was clearly taking them seriously. Colonel, Rodriguez continued, someone called in with specific information about Thompson's military background. Details that wouldn't be in public records. Any idea who might have access to that information? There was another pause, longer this time. Detective, I need you to listen very carefully. If someone's targeting Marcus using classified information, this case just became a matter of national security. I'm going to make some calls. With all due respect, Colonel, this is a local criminal matter, Rodriguez replied. Not anymore, it isn't, Mitchell said firmly. Marcus, don't say another word until I get there. Detective, I'll be at your station within 2 hours. Until then, I strongly suggest you keep Thompson in protective custody. Protective custody? Rodriguez looked confused. From who? From whoever's smart enough and connected enough to frame one of the Army's most decorated special operations soldiers. This isn't random, Detective. This is personal. The line went dead, leaving Marcus and Detective Rodriguez staring at each other across the small table. The case had just taken a turn that neither of them had expected. An hour later, Marcus was moved to a different holding cell, away from the general population. Detective Rodriguez had taken Colonel Mitchell's warning seriously, though he wasn't entirely sure what they were protecting Marcus from. The original charges were still in place, but the investigation had been expanded to include the possibility of a conspiracy. Detective Chen had been busy during this time, following up on the anonymous tip that had provided details about Marcus's military service. The call had come from a prepaid phone, purchased with cash, making it nearly impossible to trace. But the voice analysis software had picked up something interesting. The caller had a slight southern accent and used military terminology naturally, suggesting prior service. At 2 a.m, Colonel Mitchell arrived at the police station with an entourage that surprised everyone. He wasn't alone. 2 men in dark suits accompanied him, along with a woman carrying a briefcase marked with official government seals. Detective Rodriguez, the colonel said after introducing himself. This is Agent Sarah Williams from the Defense Intelligence Agency and Agent David Park from the FBI's Counterintelligence Division. We need to talk. They commandeered the station's conference room, and Marcus was brought up from his cell. He was surprised to see his former commanding officer looking older and more concerned than he remembered. Marcus, Colonel Mitchell said, gripping his shoulder. Tell me everything again. Every detail, no matter how small. Marcus repeated his story once more, but this time the federal agents asked very specific questions. They wanted to know about every person he'd encountered in the past month, every conversation he'd had, every place he'd been. Have you been contacted by anyone claiming to represent veterans organizations? Agent Williams asked. Just the usual stuff in the mail, Marcus replied. Why? Agent Park opened a file folder. We've been investigating a network of individuals using stolen veteran identities to commit fraud. They target soldiers with classified backgrounds because their records are harder to verify through normal channels. But why frame me for drug dealing? Marcus asked. Because, Colonel Mitchell said grimly, if you're convicted of a felony, especially drug-related charges, you lose your security clearance permanently. That makes it easier for them to assume your identity for their fraudulent activities. Detective Rodriguez was taking notes furiously. So this whole thing, the alley incident, the planted drugs, the anonymous tip, it was all orchestrated? Agent Williams nodded. We believe so. The men who approached you in the alley were probably working for the fraud network. They needed to create a situation where you'd be arrested and discredited. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that his innocence was being recognized, but anger that someone had gone to such elaborate lengths to destroy his life. How did they get access to my classified service records? He asked. Agent Park exchanged glances with the colonel before answering. We think there's someone inside the system feeding them information, possibly someone with legitimate access to military personnel files. That's why this case is now classified, Colonel Mitchell added. We're dealing with a security breach that could affect hundreds of veterans. Detective Rodriguez closed his notepad. So what happens now? Do we release Thompson? Not yet, Agent Williams said. We need him to help us catch the people responsible. If we release him too quickly, they'll know their plan failed and disappear. Marcus understood immediately. You want me to stay in jail and pretend their frame job worked? Just for a few days, Agent Park confirmed. We'll have teams watching your sister's neighborhood and your apartment. If these people think they've successfully neutralized you, they might make mistakes trying to use your identity. Colonel Mitchell looked uncomfortable with the plan. Marcus, you don't have to agree to this. We can find other ways to catch them. Marcus thought about his sister Sarah working double shifts to pay for school. He thought about other veterans who might be targeted by these criminals. The decision was easy. I'll do it, he said. But I want to know everything that's happening. No secrets, Agent Williams smiled for the first time since arriving. Agreed. And Marcus, for what it's worth, we're going to make sure these people pay for what they've done. As the meeting broke up, Detective Rodriguez approached Marcus privately. For what it's worth, I believed your story from the beginning. The evidence just looked too perfect, you know? Marcus shook his hand. Thanks, Detective. I appreciate you keeping an open mind. As he was escorted back to his cell, Marcus felt better than he had all night. The truth was finally coming out and he was going to help make sure justice was served. But he also knew that the next few days were going to be the hardest part. Pretending to be a criminal when you're actually the victim required a special kind of strength. He had no idea that the real test was just beginning, and that the conspiracy against him ran deeper than anyone suspected. 3 days into his voluntary imprisonment, Marcus had learned more about jail politics than he ever wanted to know. He kept to himself mostly, following the federal agent's instructions to act like a disgraced veteran who had turned to drugs after struggling with civilian life. It wasn't a pleasant role to play, but it was necessary for the investigation. His cellmate, Danny Rivera, was a career criminal who had initially tried to intimidate the new arrival. That had lasted about 5 minutes until Danny realized that Marcus wasn't someone you wanted to mess with. Since then, they had developed an uneasy truce, with Danny actually providing useful information about how things worked inside. You're different from the usual drug dealers they bring in here, Danny observed during their second day together. Most of them are either scared kids or strung-out addicts. You're neither. Marcus had prepared for these kinds of questions. Military teaches you to handle stress differently, he replied, which was true enough. What branch? Danny asked. Army. Special Forces, Marcus said, sticking close to the truth. Danny whistled low. No kidding? My brother was Army too, regular infantry though. Did 2 tours in Iraq before an IED messed him up? The conversation gave Marcus an idea. If the fraud network was targeting veterans, they might try to recruit him while he was in jail. A disgraced special operations soldier with financial problems would be exactly the kind of person they'd want to use. That afternoon, during recreation time, Marcus's theory was proved correct. A trustee named Carl Washington approached him in the yard. Carl was a smooth talker in his 40s, serving time for white-collar crimes. He had the look of someone who made deals and moved information. Heard you might be looking for work when you get out, Carl said casually, sitting down next to Marcus on the bench. Depends on what kind of work, Marcus replied, playing his part. See, I know some people who help veterans get back on their feet. Good people. Understand how hard it is for soldiers coming home. They got programs, you know, help with benefits, job placement, that kind of thing. Marcus nodded non-committally. Sounds too good to be true. That's what everyone says at first, Carl laughed. But these folks, they got connections. Military connections. They know how to work the system to get you what you deserve. What's the catch? Marcus asked. Carl looked around to make sure no one was listening. No catch, really. Just that sometimes they need help with paperwork, you know? Filling out forms for guys who can't do it themselves. Nothing illegal, just cutting through red tape. Marcus recognized this as the recruitment pitch. They were looking for veterans to help process fraudulent benefit claims, probably using the identities of soldiers who were dead, missing, or had their records compromised. I might be interested, he said carefully. When I get out, how would I contact these people? They'll contact you, Carl replied. Word gets around about who might be available for work. You just gotta be ready when opportunity knocks. That evening, Marcus used the jail's phone system to call his sister. The call was being monitored by the federal agents, so he had to speak carefully. Sarah, how are you holding up? He asked when she answered. Marcus, I'm so worried about you. The lawyer you sent says things might work out, but I don't understand what's happening. The lawyer was actually Agent Williams, maintaining the cover story. Just hang in there, sis. This will all be over soon. I've been getting strange calls, Sarah said. People asking questions about you, wanting to know about your military service and when you might be getting out of jail. This was exactly what the agents had hoped for. The fraud network was already moving to exploit Marcus's situation. What kind of questions? He asked. Stuff about what units you served with, whether you had any financial problems, that kind of thing. One guy said he was from a veterans organization and wanted to help with your legal expenses. Did you give them any information? No, I told them to contact your lawyer directly. Was that right? That was perfect, Sarah. Don't talk to anyone about my case except through the lawyer, okay? After the call, Marcus was taken to a private meeting room where Agent Park was waiting with updates on the investigation. Your instincts were right, Park said. Carl Washington is definitely connected to the fraud network. We've been watching him for months, but this is the first time we've seen him actively recruiting. What about the calls to my sister? We traced 2 of them. Both came from legitimate veterans organizations that have been infiltrated by the fraud network. They're using these groups as cover for their recruitment efforts. Marcus shook his head in disgust. They're destroying organizations that actually help veterans. Gets worse, Park continued. We found evidence that they've been targeting the families of deployed soldiers, too. Wives and children who are struggling financially while their soldier is overseas. The scope of the conspiracy was larger than Marcus had imagined. These weren't just petty criminals looking to make quick money. They were running a sophisticated operation that was harming the entire veteran community. What's our next move? Marcus asked. Tomorrow you're going to be released on bail. We've arranged for you to stay at a halfway house where Carl's associates will have easy access to you. We want them to think you're desperate and available. How long will this go on? Not long. We're coordinating with multiple agencies now. Once we identify the key players and gather enough evidence, we'll move in simultaneously across several states. The next morning, Marcus was processed for release. Colonel Mitchell was there to pick him up, maintaining his role as the supportive commanding officer trying to help a fallen soldier. How are you holding up? The colonel asked as they walked to his car. I've been in worse places, Marcus replied truthfully, but I'm ready to finish this. Marcus, I want you to know that what you're doing here goes above and beyond. You could have walked away when we proved your innocence, but you chose to help protect other veterans. Someone has to stop these people, sir. If it wasn't me in that alley, it would have been some other veteran getting framed. The halfway house was exactly what Marcus had expected. A run-down building in a questionable neighborhood, filled with people trying to get their lives back together. His room was small and barely furnished, but it would serve its purpose. That afternoon, as he sat on the front steps reading a newspaper, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. 2 men got out and walked toward him with the confident stride of people who were used to being in control. Marcus Thompson? The older one asked. He was well-dressed, probably in his 50s, with the bearing of a former military officer. Depends who's asking, Marcus replied. My name is Richard Hayes. I represent an organization that helps veterans transition back into civilian life. I heard you might be interested in some legitimate work. Marcus looked up from his paper. Carl said someone might be in touch, Hayes smiled. Carl's a good man. Sometimes people make mistakes, but that doesn't mean they can't contribute to society. We believe in second chances. What kind of work are we talking about? Marcus asked, standing up to shake hands. Why don't we go somewhere more private to discuss it? Hayes suggested. I think you'll find our offer very interesting. As Marcus got into the sedan, he activated the small recording device Agent Williams had given him. The next phase of the operation was about to begin, and he was finally going to meet the people who had tried to destroy his life. What he discovered would shock even the federal agents who thought they understood the full scope of the conspiracy. The sedan drove through the city for 20 minutes before pulling into the parking garage of an upscale office building. Richard Hayes and his companion, who had introduced himself only as Miller, escorted Marcus to the elevator. The building directory showed legitimate businesses, law firms, accounting offices, consulting groups. Nothing that screamed criminal enterprise. They rode to the 15th floor, where Hayes used a keycard to access a suite of offices marked Veterans Advocacy Solutions. The reception area looked professional, with patriotic decorations and photos of military ceremonies on the walls. If Marcus hadn't known better, he would have assumed this was exactly what it claimed to be. Impressive setup, Marcus commented as they walked through a hallway lined with certificates and awards. "We take our mission seriously," Hayes replied. "Too many veterans come home and get forgotten by the system. We're here to make sure they get what they've earned." They entered a conference room where 3 other people were waiting. 2 men and a woman, all professionally dressed, all with the subtle bearing that suggested military backgrounds. Hayes made introductions around the table. "Marcus, I'd like you to meet our operations team. Janet served as a personnel specialist with the Air Force. Tom was Navy intelligence. And Frank here was actually Army Special Forces, like yourself." Marcus shook hands with each of them, noting how they sized him up with experienced eyes. These weren't amateur criminals. They were professionals who understood military culture and procedures. "Have a seat," Hayes said, gesturing to a chair at the head of the table. "Let me explain how we can help each other." For the next hour, Hayes laid out what appeared to be a legitimate veterans assistance program. They helped former soldiers navigate the complex bureaucracy of VA benefits, assisted with disability claims, and provided job placement services. Everything sounded reasonable and legal. "The problem," Hayes continued, "is that the government makes the process incredibly difficult. Paperwork gets lost, claims get denied for technicalities, and good soldiers end up homeless or addicted while their benefits sit in some filing cabinet." "So what's the solution?" Marcus asked. Janet leaned forward. "We've developed streamlined processes, ways to cut through the red tape and get veterans the help they need quickly." Tom added, "Sometimes that means filling out paperwork for soldiers who can't do it themselves, men who are too traumatized to deal with bureaucracy, or who died before their claims were processed." Marcus felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "Died before their claims were processed?" "It's heartbreaking," Frank said with apparent sincerity. "Soldiers who served honorably, then came home and struggled until it killed them. Meanwhile, their families get nothing because some bureaucrat wanted one more form filled out. We make sure those families get what's coming to them," Hayes concluded. "We process the claims posthumously, using our connections and expertise to push them through the system." It was a clever setup. They were describing identity theft and fraud as humanitarian work, helping families of dead soldiers claim benefits they weren't entitled to. The stolen identities probably included living veterans whose records had been compromised. "Where do I fit into this?" Marcus asked. "Your background makes you perfect for our overseas operations," Hayes explained. "We have contacts in military archives both here and abroad. Sometimes we need someone who understands classified systems to help us locate documentation." Miller spoke for the first time since the introductions. "You'd be surprised how many soldiers served in units that don't officially exist, or completed missions that were never recorded. Their service deserves recognition." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "And compensation." "Exactly," Hayes smiled. "These men and women earned benefits that the government is denying them because of classification issues. We help document their service and secure their compensation." It was becoming clear that the conspiracy went far beyond simple identity theft. They were accessing classified military records, possibly from multiple countries, and using that information to create false benefit claims worth millions of dollars. "What kind of overseas work are we talking about?" Marcus asked. Frank opened a laptop and showed Marcus a series of official-looking documents. "We have research teams in Germany, Japan, Korea, and several other countries where U.S. forces have been stationed. They help us locate records that domestic agencies can't access. Sometimes," Janet added, "we need someone with your security clearance background to verify information or handle sensitive communications." Marcus studied the documents on the laptop screen. They looked authentic, but he noticed subtle inconsistencies that suggested forgery. The operation was sophisticated but not perfect. "How much does this kind of work pay?" he asked. "Depends on the complexity of the case," Hayes replied. "Simple domestic claims might earn you a few $1,000s. International work, especially involving classified records, can be worth $50,000 to $100,000 per assignment." The numbers were staggering. If they were processing even a dozen fraudulent claims per month, They were stealing millions from government benefit programs. I'm interested, Marcus said, but I need to know I'm not going to end up back in jail. My lawyer says my current case might go away if I stay out of trouble. Marcus, Hayes said earnestly, everything we do is completely legal. We're helping veterans get benefits they've earned. The government should be thanking us, not prosecuting us. Miller added, we have lawyers on retainer who specialize in veterans law. If any questions come up about our methods, they handle all the legal issues. Tom pulled out a tablet and showed Marcus a contract. This is our standard consulting agreement. It covers information gathering, document research, and administrative support for veterans' benefit claims. Marcus scanned the contract quickly. It was written in language that made their illegal activities sound like legitimate consulting work. Anyone signing it would have plausible deniability if the operation was discovered. There's just one thing, Hayes said as Marcus reviewed the paperwork. We need to verify your background before we can bring you fully into the program. What kind of verification? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew. Frank typed on his laptop for a moment. We have contacts who can access military personnel records, just to confirm that your security clearance and operational experience are what you say they are. How long does that take? Usually just a few hours, Janet replied. We'll run your information tonight and have everything confirmed by tomorrow morning. Marcus realized this was the moment the federal agents had been waiting for. The fraud network was about to access his classified records, providing direct evidence of their methods and potentially revealing their source inside the military database system. That works for me, he said, signing the contract with a steady hand. When do I start? Tomorrow, Hayes said, standing to shake hands again. Welcome to the team, Marcus. I think you're going to find this work very rewarding. As they rode the elevator back down to the parking garage, Marcus felt a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. The conspiracy was worse than anyone had imagined, but they finally had a way to bring it down. Miller dropped him back at the halfway house just as the sun was setting. Marcus went straight to his room and activated the secure communication device Agent Williams had provided. It's bigger than we thought, he reported when the agent answered. They're running an international operation with contacts in multiple countries, and they're about to access my classified records to verify my background. Perfect, Williams replied. We'll be ready for them. Marcus, you've done incredible work. By tomorrow night, this whole network will be shut down. But as Marcus tried to sleep that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. The operation was too sophisticated, too well connected for the people he had met. There had to be someone else pulling the strings, someone with real power and influence. He was about to find out just how right he was. The raid was scheduled for dawn, but everything went wrong at 4:47 a.m. when Agent Williams received an urgent phone call that changed the entire operation. Marcus was awakened in his halfway house room by the secure communication device buzzing with an emergency signal. Marcus, we have a problem. Williams's voice was tense. Someone tipped off the fraud network. The office building is empty and Hayes's team disappeared sometime during the night. Marcus sat up in bed, instantly alert. How is that possible? The building was under surveillance. That's what we're trying to figure out. But it gets worse. When our people tried to access your military records to see if the fraud team had gotten into the system, they discovered something that changes everything. What do you mean? The classified information someone used to frame you didn't come from a security breach. It came from someone with legitimate access at the highest levels. Marcus, we think there's a senior military officer involved in this conspiracy. Marcus felt his blood run cold. If a high-ranking officer was part of the fraud network, it explained how they had such sophisticated access to classified records and why they were able to operate internationally. Sir, what are my orders? Get out of that halfway house immediately. If they know we were onto them, you're not safe. Colonel Mitchell is on his way to pick you up. 20 minutes later, Marcus was in the passenger seat of Colonel Mitchell's personal vehicle, driving through the empty streets toward the federal building downtown. The colonel's face was grim as he explained what the investigators had discovered. The security breach goes back at least 5 years, Mitchell said. Someone with access to multiple classified systems has been feeding information to the fraud network. We're talking about records from Special Operations Command, Defense Intelligence Agency, even CIA contractor files. Do we know who? We have our suspicions, but no proof yet. The investigation is being handled at the highest levels now. The Secretary of Defense has been briefed. They arrived at the federal building just as the sun was coming up. Agent Williams met them at a side entrance, escorting them through several security checkpoints to a secure conference room deep inside the building. "Marcus," Williams said once they were seated, "I need you to think back over your military career. Specifically, I need you to remember anyone who might have had access to the records that were used against you." Marcus closed his eyes and thought back through 12 years of service. His personnel file would have been accessed by numerous people: commanding officers, administrative staff, intelligence personnel, medical officers. "There are dozens of people who could have seen my complete file," he said finally, "but someone who could access multiple soldiers' records from different units and time periods, that's a much smaller list." Agent Williams placed a tablet on the table with photos of several senior military officers. "We need you to look at these pictures and tell us if you recognize anyone." Marcus studied the faces carefully. Most were unfamiliar, but one photo made him pause. A brigadier general with graying hair and steel blue eyes looked familiar, though he couldn't immediately place where he might have seen the man. "This one," Marcus said, pointing to the photo. "I've seen him before, but I can't remember where." Colonel Mitchell leaned over to look at the photo. "That's Brigadier General Robert Crane. He's currently assigned to the Pentagon, working in personnel systems oversight. That would give him access to records from across the entire military," Williams observed. "What about him seems familiar, Marcus?" Marcus concentrated, trying to recall where he had encountered the general. Then it hit him. "The VA hospital," he said suddenly. "2 weeks before I was arrested, I was waiting for an appointment when I overheard 2 men discussing veterans' benefit fraud. One of them looked like this, but he wasn't in uniform." Williams and Mitchell exchanged significant glances. "Marcus," the colonel said carefully, "General Crane has been under investigation by the Inspector General's office for the past 6 months. Allegations of misusing his access to personnel records." "Then why is he still in position?" Marcus asked. "Because until now we couldn't prove what he was doing with the information," Williams replied. "Your case gave us the evidence we needed to connect him to the fraud network." The door to the conference room opened, and 2 more agents entered with a man in handcuffs. Marcus recognized him immediately. It was Richard Hayes from the Veterans Advocacy Group. "Mr. Hayes has decided to cooperate with our investigation," one of the agents announced. "He's provided us with some very interesting information about his relationship with General Crane." Hayes looked haggard and defeated as he was seated across from Marcus. "I want to make a deal," he said immediately. "Full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges." "Start talking," Williams replied. For the next 2 hours, Hayes laid out the entire conspiracy. General Crane had approached him 3 years earlier with a proposal to help deserving veterans by streamlining their benefit claims. What started as processing legitimate claims for soldiers who had been overlooked by the bureaucracy had gradually evolved into a sophisticated fraud operation. Crane provided us with lists of soldiers who had died in combat or from service-related injuries, Hayes explained. We would process posthumous benefit claims for their families, keeping a percentage as administrative fees. But it didn't stop there, did it? Williams pressed. Hayes shook his head. Crane started giving us information about living soldiers with classified backgrounds. He said these men had earned benefits they weren't receiving because their service records were too sensitive to process through normal channels. Marcus realized the full scope of what had been done to him. "You were using our identities to create false benefit claims." "Not false," Hayes protested. "Enhanced. We were documenting service that couldn't be officially acknowledged. By stealing classified information and forging government documents," Colonel Mitchell said angrily. "Crane said it was patriotic work," Hayes continued. "He convinced us that the government was abandoning its most valuable soldiers because of bureaucratic red tape." Williams placed a recording device on the table. "We're going to need you to make some phone calls. Mr. Hayes, General Crane doesn't know we've arrested you yet." The next phase of the operation was designed to gather direct evidence of Crane's involvement. Hayes would call the general, claiming that Marcus Thompson had been successfully recruited and was ready for his first assignment. When Hayes made the call, General Crane's voice was crisp and professional. "Excellent work, Richard. I have a perfect assignment for Mr. Thompson. We need someone to verify some personnel records from his old unit." "What kind of verification?" Hayes asked, following the script the agents had prepared. There are some discrepancies in the files for soldiers who served under his command in Afghanistan. We need someone with insider knowledge to help us resolve the issues. Marcus understood immediately. Crane was planning to use him to help create false records for soldiers from his own unit, possibly men who had died in combat. It was a betrayal that went beyond simple fraud. It was desecrating the memory of fallen soldiers. The call provided everything the investigators needed. Within hours, General Crane was arrested at his Pentagon office, and simultaneous raids were conducted at locations across multiple states and several foreign countries. The final tally was staggering. Over $300 million in fraudulent benefit claims processed over 5 years, affecting thousands of veterans and their families. The network had operated in 12 countries and involved dozens of co-conspirators. 6 months later, Marcus sat in a federal courthouse watching as the sentences were handed down. General Crane received 25 years in federal prison. Hayes got 15 years. The other members of the network received sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years. After the sentencing, Colonel Mitchell approached Marcus outside the courthouse. "The Secretary of Defense wanted me to personally thank you," the colonel said. "Your actions saved the integrity of the entire veterans benefit system." "I just did what any soldier would do, sir," Marcus replied. "No, Marcus. What you did went far beyond duty. You risked your life and your reputation to protect your fellow veterans." Colonel Mitchell handed Marcus an envelope with official letterhead. "The Army would like to offer you a position with the Criminal Investigation Command. We need people like you to make sure something like this never happens again." Marcus looked at the envelope, then at the courthouse where justice had finally been served. He thought about his sister Sarah, who had supported him through the entire ordeal. He thought about the veterans whose identities had been stolen and the families who had been deceived. "I'll consider it, sir," he said finally. "But first, I think I need to visit some old friends and make sure they know their service records are secure." As he walked away from the courthouse, Marcus felt a sense of closure he hadn't experienced since leaving the military. The conspiracy that had tried to destroy his life was finished, and he had helped protect the integrity of the system that supported America's veterans. The 3 men who had tried to frame him in that alley would never know that they had picked on the wrong soldier. But their network was finished and justice had been served. It was a good day's work for a soldier who had never stopped serving his country.